There is an invisible thread that stitches together all human stories, all serious conversations about faith, all discussions about right and wrong. That thread is called tension. And within Christianity, perhaps the oldest, and at the same time most current tension is this: how to live between grace and truth. Since the world began, we have leaned toward one side or the other. Some embrace grace as if it were a warm blanket on a cold night. They accept, embrace, protect. Others wield truth like a sharp sword, cutting, separating, judging. But Jesus, in a disconcerting way, walked on that thin and dangerous line and never misstepped. The Gospel of John says he came full of grace and truth. Not a little of each, not half and half, full, complete. And this leaves us with an uncomfortable question. Do we know what it means to be full of grace and truth at the same time? Or are we content with being partial, distorted, unbalanced?
Think for a moment of all the times someone said, "I'm just speaking the truth," as an excuse to be cruel. Truth in its pure form is not the problem. The problem is how we use it, as a weapon to win arguments, not as a bridge to reach hearts. How many times has truth been used to crush those who are down? How many times have we used it like a spotlight to expose others' shame, forgetting that we ourselves have much to hide? It's ironic. The same mouth that proclaims, "The truth will set you free," can, unknowingly, imprison someone in fear and guilt. But here is the hard point. We cannot give up truth to avoid hurting. Comfortable lies are anesthetics that, in the end, kill. Truth is hard, but it is the only thing that can heal. Yet to heal, it must come with something else: grace.
If on one side there are those who turn truth into a hammer, on the other, there are those who turn grace into a blank check. God is love, they say, as if that were synonymous with God doesn't care about what we do. They talk about the cross, but forget that Jesus also said, "Go and sin no more." Grace without truth is like a doctor who hugs the patient, smiles, and says, "You're fine," even knowing there is a growing tumor. It's affection, but not love. It's acceptance, but not care. And worse, it is cowardice disguised as kindness. Many confuse grace with absolute tolerance, as if to love meant never to confront. But if that were true, Christ would not have overturned the tables in the temple. He would not have called the Pharisees whitewashed tombs. He would not have looked into the eyes of the rich young man and told him to sell everything he had. True grace does not ignore sin. It looks at it head on and offers a way out. And here is the uncomfortable part. Offering true grace is costly. It's easier to pretend you saw nothing. It's more comfortable to smile and say, "It's all okay," even when it's not.
Between grace and truth, there is a tightrope. Whoever walks it lives in a constant dilemma. If I speak the truth, I might hurt. If I offer only grace, I might deceive. The problem is that balance is not natural for us. Our flesh wants shortcuts. And that's why we see entire churches and people leaning to only one side, either becoming cold courts or turning into parties where no one talks about sin. But Christ did not call us to choose a side. He called us to follow Him. And following Jesus means walking on that narrow line. Being full of grace and truth is not something achieved by a formula. It's more like a daily exercise. Listening before speaking, loving before judging, but also speaking before it's too late.
Perhaps the clearest scene of this dilemma is in John 8. A woman is dragged into the middle of the square, surrounded by men ready to kill her. The law was on their side. The truth was clear. She had sinned. And then Jesus bends down and writes on the sand. We don't know what he wrote. Maybe names, maybe sins, maybe nothing. What matters is that in the end, those men dropped their stones and left. And here comes the final blow. Jesus looks at the woman and says, "I do not condemn you either. Grace. Go and sin no more." Truth.
He did not deny her guilt. He did not say it wasn't really like that. He acknowledged the sin and yet offered a new start. It's this mixture that so easily escapes us. We want the comfort of only one side, but Jesus calls us to carry both.
To be like Christ in this aspect is painful, because it means that sometimes you will have to speak truths that break the hearts of those you love, and endure their silence afterward. It means that other times you will have to forgive those who do not deserve it, give chances to those who have disappointed you 1,000 times, and hear people say you are being naive. Grace will make you appear weak to some. Truth will make you seem harsh to others. And here lies the test. Are you willing to be misunderstood in order to be faithful to Christ?
Before thinking about how to apply grace and truth in others' lives, look at yourself. How many times do you ask for grace but offer truth? How many times do you demand understanding for your mistakes but are merciless with others' faults? How many times do you take refuge in sincerity just to avoid repenting of your cruel tone? The eternal dilemma is not just theoretical, it is personal. It begins in the mirror. And this is where it hurts, because we discovered that we are not only victims of imbalance, we are the authors of it.
Grace and truth are like wound and balm. Truth reveals where the cut is. Grace cleans and heals. Without truth, the wound festers hidden. Without grace, the cut bleeds to death. And we need both, not only for others, but for ourselves. Because every day we sin, every day we fail, every day we need Christ to say to us, "I do not condemn you either. Go and sin no more." The problem is that the world doesn't understand this combination. It prefers labels. Either you are of love or you are of the law. But Jesus never fit into labels. He broke them.
Between grace and truth, the easier path is to choose a side, but Christ's path is to keep both lit, even when they seem to clash. This requires prayer, requires humility, requires willingness to fail trying to get it right, and to ask forgiveness when you fail. It means that sometimes you will say no to someone you love, and it will hurt more in you than in them. It means that sometimes you will embrace someone who doesn't deserve it, and hear people say you are coddling them. But don't be mistaken. Loving as Jesus loved was never about merit, and speaking truth as Jesus spoke was never about winning debates.
Perhaps that's why I call it the eternal dilemma. Because as long as there are people in the world, this tension will exist, and it won't go away until everything is restored. But until then, we are called to be living letters that show who Christ is, not just a judge, not just a father, but both at the same time. And maybe, in the end, what matters most is not to always get it right in this balance, but to never give up on it. To keep trying, keep listening, keep correcting ourselves. Because every time we choose to be faithful to both grace and truth, the world sees a little more of who Jesus really is.
So, I leave you with a question, not to be answered quickly. When was the last time you loved someone enough to tell the truth they needed to hear, and at the same time reached out to help them change? Or, flipping it, when was the last time you forgave someone who broke your heart, but still spoke clearly about what could no longer continue? If the answer doesn't come easily, maybe it's time to look again at the Christ who came full of grace and truth and ask him how to do the same. Because, in the end, it's impossible to walk this tightrope alone. And only when we are connected to him can we hold steady without falling to either side.